a giant stalked through the darkness. In the moonless calm after midnight, the great fleet seemed not so much to navigate the narrow strait as to fill it with armor and steel. Barely visible even to a night-trained eye, the long silhouettes of 23 warships passed in a column 10 miles long, guided by the dim glow of the channel lights in the passage, threading between the headlands of Luzon and Samar. That such a majestic procession should move without challenge was surprising, inexplicable even, in light of the vicious reception the Americans had already given it on its journey from Borneo to this critical point. That autumn, the Roberts joined a task unit designated Taffy 3 under Rear Admiral Clifton A.F. Sprague. The unit included 6 small escort carriers, the Fanshawe Bay, St. Lo, White Plains, Callinan Bay, Gambier Bay, and Kitkun Bay, each a converted merchant hull with a wooden flight deck. Protecting them were 3 destroyers, the Hole, the Heerman, and the Johnston under Commander Ernest E. Evans. Evans was a Cherokee from Oklahoma who had enlisted at 19 and won a place at Annapolis by competitive examination. At the Johnston's commissioning, he told his crew, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, not one man left." By mid-October 1944, this collection of untested ships and untried men had taken station off the Philippine island of Samar, guarding the northern flank of General MacArthur's invasion force at Leyte Gulf. They did not yet know that the Japanese Navy was sailing to meet them. By October 24th, Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force had steamed deep into the Sibuyan Sea, the inland waterway west of the Philippine Islands. His flagship, the Yamato, rode at the head of a column of warships unlike any the Japanese Navy had ever assembled. The column included the super battleship Musashi, the aged battlewagon Nagato, the fast Kongo and Haruna, 10 heavy cruisers, and 2 squadrons of destroyers. Kurita had lost the heavy cruisers Atago and Maya to submarine attack the day before, but his fighting strength remained enormous. The lack of air cover troubled him more than any loss of ships. At 10 that morning, radar operators on the Musashi reported American aircraft approaching. Wave after wave of fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo planes from Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet fell upon the center force. The Musashi absorbed the brunt of the assault. 19 torpedo hits and 17 bomb strikes tore through her armored decks and hull. By late afternoon, the largest battleship ever built was dead in the water, her bow submerged, her list irreversible. Kurita watched his proud ship roll over and sink, taking half her crew with her. The loss was not just a blow to his fleet, but an omen of how hopelessly outmatched his surface force was against American air power. That same afternoon, Admiral William F. Halsey received reports that changed the course of the battle. Scout planes from the Third Fleet had located Japanese aircraft carriers off Cape Engano, far to the north. Halsey had spent his entire career dreaming of bringing enemy flat-tops within range of his guns. Carriers were the prize, and he saw no reason to divide his force guarding a strait that a retreating enemy seemed unlikely to use. At 8:22 that evening, Halsey ordered the entire Third Fleet carriers, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers to steam north and strike Ozawa's decoy force at dawn. His message had mentioned a contingency plan. Task Force 34, built around 4 fast battleships, would be formed to guard San Bernardino Strait if needed. Admiral Thomas Kincaid, commanding the 7th Fleet in Leyte Gulf, overheard the message and assumed the task force had been detached. He believed his northern flank was secure. Admiral Chester Nimitz, monitoring from Pearl Harbor, made the same assumption. But Halsey had never issued the order to detach. The strait lay open, and Kurita, battered but determined, was already threading his surviving ships through the narrow passage under the cover of darkness. As Kurita pushed eastward, another act of the Japanese plan was reaching its climax far to the south. In the narrow 12-mile-wide channel of Surigao Strait, Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf had set a classic trap. His 6 battleships, 5 of them veterans of Pearl Harbor, raised and repaired, steamed in a single battle line across the northern exit of the strait. Ahead of them, 39 PT boats and 22 destroyers waited in the darkness. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura's southern force had no hope of surprising anyone. The Americans knew he was coming and they were ready. Just before 3 in the morning, the American destroyers struck, launching torpedoes from both sides of the strait. The battleship Fuso was hit and broke in 2. The Yamashiro Nishimura's flagship staggered under a rain of shells from radar-directed battleship guns that crossed the Japanese T. By 4:19, the Yamashiro had capsized and sunk, taking Nishimura and most of his crew with her. 100 miles north on the escort carrier St. Lo, Ensign Bill Brooks and the other pilots of Taffy 3 heard the distant chatter of victory on the radio frequency that carried the battle's echoes. They pumped their fists and cheered, not knowing that the most dangerous enemy was already sliding past an unguarded strait and bearing down on them. At 6:43 in the morning, Ensign Bill Brooks was patrolling in his TBM Avenger when a hole in the clouds revealed ships below. He counted battleships, cruisers, destroyers, almost the entire Japanese center force, steaming southeast at high speed. Brooks radioed the sighting to Admiral Sprague aboard the Fanshawe Bay. The Admiral demanded confirmation, and Brooks dove through anti-aircraft fire to be sure. The pagoda masts and red sun flags left no doubt. Kurita had slipped through San Bernardino Strait and was bearing down on Taffy 3. Aboard the destroyer Johnston, Commander Ernest Evans assessed the situation in seconds. His ship was closest to the enemy, and he knew the escort carriers behind him had no armor and no hope if the Japanese battle line closed the range. Evans gave the order: left full rudder, flank speed, prepare to attack the entire Japanese fleet. Gunnery Officer Bob Hagen heard the command and felt dread. He knew his skipper would never retreat. The Johnston turned northwest alone into the smoking face of Kurita's guns. As 14-inch salvos walked across the sea around them, the Johnston closed to torpedo range. Hagen opened fire with his 5-inch guns at 18,000 yards, scoring hit after hit on the heavy cruiser Kumano. Lieutenant Ellsworth Welch, standing on the bridge, saw the flashes. At 10,000 yards, Evans shouted the order to fire torpedoes. 10 Mark 15 fish leaped from their tubes, running hot and straight. One struck the Kumano in the bow, ripping it clean away and knocking the cruiser out of the battle. To the south, the destroyer Hole under Commander Leon Kintberger had been laying smoke for the carriers. When Sprague ordered the destroyers to attack, Kintberger turned his ship toward the enemy as well. The Hole steamed into a crossfire of battleships and cruisers, closing to 9,000 yards before launching 5 torpedoes at the battleship Congo. As the Hole wheeled away, Japanese shells found their mark, tearing through the bridge and the forward fear room. Shells ripped into the Hull's after-engine room and fear room, releasing clouds of superheated steam that killed 16 men in an instant. With her port screw frozen and rudder locked, the Hull circled helplessly under concentrated enemy fire. Lieutenant John C.W. Dix watched from the bridge as the ship absorbed more than 40 hits. The destroyer's torpedo officer ordered the last 5 fish fired by hammer strikes on the manual firing pins, sending them on their way before the Hull went dead in the water. Close behind, the Heerman under Commander Amos Hathaway fired a spread of torpedoes at a Tone-class heavy cruiser, then turned toward the Japanese battle line. Yamato herself was forced to turn north to evade the approaching torpedoes, taking Kurita's flagship out of the fight for 10 critical minutes. During that time, the Heerman engaged 4 Japanese battleships at close range, firing some 500 shells in a running duel. The little destroyer absorbed hits forward and amidships, but kept fighting. Aboard the Samuel B. Roberts, Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland watched the heavier destroyers engage and knew the time for his own ship had come. His 3 torpedoes were still aboard, and he ordered the destroyer escort to charge the incoming cruiser column. Over the intercom, Copeland told his crew, "This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can." Copeland had insisted on keeping those tubes when a senior admiral wanted to replace them with a 40mm gun. Now that decision paid off. The Roberts closed to 4,000 yards, point-blank range, and launched her 3 torpedoes at the heavy cruiser Chokai. With torpedoes away, Copeland ordered the Roberts back toward the carriers, engaging the Japanese cruiser Chikuma with her 2 5-inch guns. Gunner's mate, 3rd Class Paul Henry Carr, commanded the aftermount, Gun 52, and his crew fired with astonishing speed. They cycled 324 rounds through that single barrel in 35 minutes, ignoring the heat and the failing systems. When the power failed, they loaded by hand. When the gas ejection line failed, they kept loading anyway. Then the breech overheated past endurance, cooked off a shell. The explosion killed most of the crew instantly. Carr, mortally wounded, was found cradling a final shell, trying to lift it into the wrecked breech. Chikuma caught fire from bow to stern as the little ship dueled a vessel 12 times her displacement. As the battle raged, Admiral Halsey, 200 miles to the north chasing Ozawa's decoy, received a message from Admiral Nimitz. "Where is Task Force 34? The world wonders." The message stung Halsey like a lash. He ordered his fast battleships to turn south, but they were 200 miles away and hours too late. For Taffy 3, no help was coming. The destroyers and destroyer escorts of the screen were fighting alone, buying every minute of time for the carriers with their own survival. Gambier Bay, listing hard to port and dead in the water, had become a floating target for the Japanese cruisers. At 9:07 a.m., after absorbing relentless punishment, the escort carrier rolled over and sank, the first American carrier ever lost to enemy surface gunfire. Not far away, the hull, shattered by more than 40 hits, drifted helplessly as Japanese shells continued to punch through her thin hull. Commander Kintberger, seeing his ship was finished, passed the order to abandon ship, and the crew went over the side as the destroyer rolled to port and disappeared beneath the sea. In the oil-slicked water, survivors of the hull clung to wreckage and watched their ship vanish. They had done their work, all 10 torpedoes fired. The Congo, forced to evade the Japanese advance, slowed. Now they floated in a spreading fuel slick, bodies bobbing in the swells as Japanese destroyers steamed past. Lieutenant Dix, treading water near a battered raft, saw the towering silhouette of the battleship Yamato slice through the horizon, its crew standing at attention, ignoring the Americans below. With the ship taking hits from all sides and flooding through a gaping hole in the hull, Lieutenant Commander Copeland gave the order to abandon ship. He stayed until the wounded were over the side, then jumped into the oil-coated water. He could not swim, but he rolled onto his back and kicked his way toward a raft, just as his first lieutenant had instructed him. The Samuel B. Roberts sank stern first, her bow rising vertically before sliding under. In the chaos, the ship's mascot, a mixed-breed dog named Sammy, paddled to a raft, then turned and swam back toward the sinking ship. He was never seen again. Survivors floated in a thick carpet of fuel oil, waiting for death or rescue. Among them drifted Gun 55's Captain Clint Carter, who had commanded the Johnston's after 5-inch mount through the entire furious engagement. A Japanese destroyer approached slowly, and the Americans braced for machine gun fire. Instead, the crew lined the rail and stood at attention. An officer on the bridge raised his hand in a salute. Something splashed into the water near Carter, a large can of tomatoes packed in Arkansas. The destroyer passed on, and the Johnston's crew drifted alone, covered in oil, watching the Japanese fleet withdraw to the north. Earlier at 9:11 on the morning of October 25th, Admiral Kurita made the decision that saved Taffy 3. Despite being on the verge of destroying the American escort carriers, he ordered his fleet to withdraw north. He feared the growing air attacks that were hammering his ships from all directions. His own flagship, the Yamato, had been forced to turn away from torpedoes. He did not know that the American carriers were nearly out of ammunition and that his victory was within reach. The Japanese retreat came just in time for the battered American carriers, but no sooner had the surface threat receded than a new horror appeared from the sky. At about 11 o'clock, 5 Japanese planes dove out of the clouds toward Taffy 3, 1-0 fighter lined up on the St. Lo, flying straight and level as if preparing to land. The pilot nosed over and plunged into the flight deck. His bombs detonated in the hangar deck below, where ordnance crews were arming planes. Aviation fuel ignited instantly, and torpedoes and bombs began exploding in a chain of blasts that tore the ship apart. Within 30 minutes, the St. Lo rolled over and sank. It was the first American ship ever sunk by a suicide aircraft. The superstition about the ship's name change from the Midway had proved tragically true. Long before the kamikazes struck, at around 10 o'clock, the Johnston had already gone down. Bob Hagan, her gunnery officer, dove from his gun director and swam away as the destroyer rolled over and sank. He found a young torpedoman in the water who grinned and said, "Mr. Hagan, we got off all 10 of those torpedoes, and they ran hot, straight, and normal. That small pride in a job well done was all that remained of their ship." Commander Evans was not among the survivors. He had been seen on the fantail of the Johnston, stripped to the waist, covered in blood, conning his ship through an open hatch. As the ship went down, he was last seen walking forward. He never made it to the life rafts. His body was never recovered. The Cherokee warrior, who had sworn he would never retreat, went down with his ship. Hour after hour, the men treaded water in burning fuel oil, fighting off sharks and dehydration. Many did not survive, but rescue did come, slowly. Destroyers and landing craft from the invasion force pushed out into the open sea. By late afternoon, most of the survivors had been pulled from the water, exhausted and covered in black oil, but alive. The cost of the battle was staggering for both sides. Japan lost 3 battleships, 4 aircraft carriers, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. The United States lost 1 escort carrier, 2 destroyers, and 1 destroyer escort. But the Japanese had failed in their objective. The beachhead at Leyte was secure, and MacArthur's invasion force was safe. The battle off Samar became one of the most celebrated actions in American naval history. Admiral Sprague was awarded the Navy Cross for his leadership. Commander Evans received the Medal of Honor, the first Native American in the Navy to be so honored. Lieutenant Commander Copeland and his crew were recognized for their extraordinary courage against overwhelming odds. The men of Taffy 3 had done what the textbook said was impossible. After the war, Copeland returned to his law practice in Tacoma. He rarely spoke about the battle, but he never forgot his men. Bob Hagan recovered from his wounds and continued his naval career, retiring with the rank of captain. Ellsworth Welch survived the battle, was rescued that afternoon, and returned to civilian life. Bill Brooks survived the war and returned to civilian life. The ship's chief radio man was among the severely wounded but survived, having paid the debt of gratitude he felt toward the United States. Most of the survivors went home, picked up the pieces of their lives, and carried the memory of their fallen shipmates with them. The men of the Samuel B. Roberts, the Johnston, the Hole, and the other ships of Taffy 3 had written their names into history. When the guns fell silent off Samar, a handful of small American ships had done what no one expected them to do. They had turned back the most powerful battle fleet Japan ever assembled. They had bought time with their lives, and they had saved the invasion of the Philippines. The thin steel of their hulls had held just long enough. The tin can sailors had stood their ground, and the world would never forget what they did there.